Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video we've got something different, something that I haven't done in a while, and it's an incredibly versatile build, an individual build that you can do a ton of different things with. This one's absolutely awesome. I cannot wait to get into this. This is the Blood Pyro Knight, and this is essentially going to use a ton of different faith incantations, specifically fire incantations, in combination with bleed, as well as being able to use the Blasphemous blade too without changing talismans or stats. Also, throughout this video, I'm so excited about DLC, by the way. We're going to be talking about DLC, and I'm going to ask the community some questions about the trailer on your thoughts, so be sure to comment those below as the questions come up. For Margit here, we started with Burno Flame using the Giant Seal in the offhand and the Dragon Communion Seal in the main hand, and we're using the Scavenger Curved Sword with Blood Blade. We'll also be using the Blasphemous Blade too. One other quick mention, by the way, is this is a really versatile, fun, and powerful build. This is honestly one of the most fun builds that I've been running lately because there's just so much you can do with it. We're throwing in some dragon incantations to get a frost proc here, and then we're going to go back to the Blasphemous Blade. This is also an entire main game boss guide, and it's all on New Game Plus 7. This is actually Journey 31, believe it or not, so yeah, we're at max scaling. Everything has the maximum amount of HP that it's going to get, and we're at rune level 150. Yeah, as we go through the main bosses, a lot of these bosses go down really fast because we're using Blood Blade and Occult on the Scavenger Curved Sword. We have the Blasphemous Blade at our disposal. We're using Burno Flame. We're going to add stuff in like Swarm of Flies too, and some Dragon Incantations. First question I have for you guys based on the DLC trailer is, we saw one of the boss's hands. Were they casting Destined Death? Was that Thorn Sorceries? What was the deal with that? What do you think the lore behind that is? In a second here, we're going to be moving on to Radahn, and let me tell you this, we actually destroy Radahn incredibly fast. He doesn't even get to phase 2. This ends up being incredible. Again, the versatility here and the amount of power. By the way, all those 3 bosses took only 1 try on New Game Plus 7, which was awesome. And for Radahn, since we're a Faith and Arcane build, we're going to use the Dragon Communion Seal in our main hand so we can get the good scaling over 300, and then in our offhand, we're going to use the Giant Seal to get a passive boost to Burno Flame. This ends up amounting to really good damage, around 6,400. After this, we have other options. We can go with the Blasphemous Blade, or we can switch to the Scavenger Curved Sword quickly to also run a bleed build too and take care of Radahn fast. I also can't express how much fun I had with this build. I recommend trying this out no matter what you're doing in Eldenring. This is going to give you a lot of versatility. You're going to be able to run all of your favorite incantations, and you're going to have a bleed build and the Blasphemous Blade, which we know is also incredibly good. In the build, by the way, and everything you need to know will be shown at the end, including the buffing order, basically, and we're going to go over everything, actually, so you'll know everything you need to know as far as running this build and the best setup for it. As far as the Draconic Tree Sentinel, he got a couple hits in. Be sure to take advantage of his long wind-up time. You can get him down to half HP fast. Here we're using range bleed with Blood Blade on our Scavenger Curved Sword. That's giving us a lot of damage and bleed build up, and then of course we could switch back to anything else. It is difficult to use the Dragon Incantations against him based on his moveset. He has a lot of good ranged attacks like the Fireball and the Lightning there. I think the difficulty for him lies in the fact that once you get to a mid or longer range, he's going to spam the fireballs and the lightning, and when you're up close, he's going to be able to hit you with physical attacks that are incredibly hard hitting, especially here on New Game Plus 7, where it usually takes just 1 or 2 to completely wipe 60 vigor off the board. But he did go down, and we're going to be moving on to Golden Shade. Now, Golden Shade on this run ended up being the first boss that would kill me. I got him on the second try. He can be a little bit frustrating, but the Blasphemous Blade does take good care of Golden Shade, especially if you keep your distance, pay attention to your moves, and make sure you don't get stuck in the animation and hit. At the end of the day, you will be able to take him down quickly this way, and the Blasphemous Blade here, we're not going to switch anything else because he's immune to pretty much all status effects and stuff, so bleed isn't going to work here. We're going to go with the Blasphemous Blade. Now, we could throw in different incantations, but Burno Flame is kind of difficult to pull off against Golden Shade, although it does do a lot of damage to him. Yeah, so I ended up getting defeated by him the first time. The second time I went in, I believe I ended up getting a no-hit here, which isn't overly impressive with Golden Shade. If you stay close to him, you can dodge his attacks and then kind of keep your distance. But all in all, at the end of the day, you should probably stay back with the Blasphemous Blade because when you're using the Ash of War or the animation, he has a tendency to run up and hit you really fast, so you want to keep distance. And the next boss up here is Morgott as we're moving through things incredibly fast on New Game Plus 7. This was a really impressive build. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed kind of creating this and doing different things with it. First thing here, because Morgott also has 0 fire resistance, we're going to use Burno Flame, and then we're going to end up switching to Blood Blade. Yep, no fire resistance there, and he's fairly weak to bleed too. A lot of the early and mid-game bosses you can pretty much destroy with bleed, and Bloodblade works fine here. We're going to spam it as much as we can there, back off for a little bit, and then we can switch to the Blasphemous Blade to finish off this fight quickly. Next question based on the trailer. As far as the lion goes that we saw in the trailer, is that some kind of omen thing, or does that have a relation to Godfrey? What's the lore there? I'm not sure yet on it. I'm going to be looking into it myself, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. And with Morgott down, we're going to be moving on to the Fire Giant, which is one of just a handful of lengthier fights, probably 2 minutes and change for the Fire Giant. Let's jump into it here. And now we're moving on to the Fire Giant, only 5.5 minutes into the video. I guess that shows how good the build is. It really is good. It has a lot of versatility. It's so much fun. I cannot recommend it enough, and we're going to be expanding upon this build a little bit in the next video too. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're going to be doing my top 10 off meta builds for Sunday, which are basically different builds that are powerful but not used as much. This one does make an appearance. You can see me take on Malenia on New Game Plus 7 with it, but we're also going to be doing a Black Flame version of this build in that video too. I literally got so excited from DLC that the night of the trailer I went and actually made this entire video. I've been using this build for a while now. I wanted to post it in one of my list videos, but it was so cool seeing that trailer. I had such a great impression of it. It looks absolutely phenomenal that I ended up doing an entire playthrough with this build. Yeah, I may or may not have mentioned this. The Fire Giant killed me once. This was the second try in total. Overall, though, Bloodblade works well on him. He does take good damage from bleed, and phase 2 ends up going fairly fast, too. Overall, I think it was a 2-minute and change fight, but mainly here, we're going to avoid the Blasphemous Blade, given his fire resistance. Yeah, believe it or not, his fire resistance is not 80% like Mohg's or Rykard's, but it is around 50%, and that right there for me says, well, that's probably not going to be the best damage type here, and overall, the best bet is going to be going with Bloodblade. You can use Swarm of Flies if you want to add some more bleed too. And we're on to phase 2 of the Fire Giant, where we're going to be mostly trying to get behind him to see if we can do a lot of damage with Bloodblade. It's not going to do that much damage because he has good physical resistance here, but the bleed buildup is substantial, and as long as we get those bleed procs, we can make quick work of him. Keep in mind, on base game, the Fire Giant has about 43,000 HP. On New Game Plus 7 max scaling, he has 64,000 HP. The only boss in the entire game with more HP than the Fire Giant is Rykard. Rykard has an absurd 105,000 HP on New Game Plus 7, so yeah, that's pretty insane, but overall the Fire Giant has a lot too, given 64,000 is a fair bit. Overall though, Bloodblade works well, and we're able to get a lot of bleed build up and get those bleed procs we need to take the Fire Giant down, although we do end up having to dodge a couple of his moves, which is pretty normal for an epic Fire Giant fight. This ended up actually being a really good fight. I love some of these fights when they end up coming down to the wire a little bit. Yeah, I didn't take a lot of damage there, but he did give me a little bit of a hard time and made it more entertaining. Sometimes he does go down fast, especially if you use something like the Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike or some of the big target damage stuff in the game. Speaking of that, you can actually do that. Go for the Lightning Terror and the Lightning Scorpion Charm, and then you can end up using Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike with the Dragon Communion Seal and the Gravelstone Seal in the offhand for the boost. I just didn't want to change up any talismans and stick to the same talismans because we're calling it one build as a whole, although it does have a lot of versatility, and as I mentioned, there'll be a Black Flame version coming out soon too. I believe for the Black Flame version, that's going to be different talismans, but the same stat spread and setup, where with the Faith tier, we end up with 45 Arcane and 45 Faith, and we have a lot of versatility. We could do a lot of incantations, use the Blasphemous Blade, and bleed. For this fight, by the way, I added the White Mask, but I wasn't using it in general because it's not typically my style. I like a lot of other armor sets. The White Mask doesn't really go with anything in particular, though keep in mind whenever you're doing bleed, if you add that with Lord of Blood's Exaltation, you'll end up with a 30% damage boost in total. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the dragon incantations. I know you're like, well, you're using 2 dragon seals. Well, that's just to get some frost and stuff. I end up fighting him at the end here instead of using the sleeping pots, but overall, I'm using the Dragon Communion Seal so that I can get good scaling, and then I'm able to use the Blasphemous Blade and bleed while investing in Arcane and Faith, while pretty much avoiding most of the dragon spells. They're good, don't get me wrong, but overall, we have a really versatile build here that can take advantage of a passive boost in the offhand. Basically getting over 300 scaling and then using whatever passive boost you want to use so that we can still rock one of the best weapons in the game at 45 Faith in the Blasphemous Blade, and we're going to be using that here for Beast Clergyman and Maliketh. And the Blasphemous Blade's Ash of War Taker's Flame will scale entirely with Faith. It actually has a pretty hard cap around 60, so getting 45 Faith isn't too bad. You can see the damage that we get from the Blasphemous Blade is not bad at all, and it actually makes quick work of Beast Clergyman. Now the second phase is always another story because you actually have to hit him with the Ash of War. He moves around a lot, so that can be a little bit frustrating, but overall it is a very good weapon to use in this fight because you're constantly healing and getting HP back using Taker's Flames. This fight ended up taking me 3 tries in total, which isn't too bad. Again, on New Game Plus 7, keep in mind everything hits harder too, so it is a little bit difficult. Even with 60 Vigor, sometimes you get hit just twice, sometimes even once for Godfrey. His physical damage is insane, but yeah, you can be taken out very quickly because all the bosses will do more damage too. So as we get down to the wire in this fight here, the next question for Eldenring DLC is kind of a generic question, but what specifically in the trailer are you looking forward to most? Is it the locations? Is it the new weapons and spells? Some of that gravity magic looked absolutely awesome. What's the thing you're looking forward to most? The bosses, etc.? Comment below. For me, it's the fact that we're hearing 8 new weapon types. I don't know if that was actually confirmed or not, but it sounds like 8 new weapon types will be added to the game. That's really exciting. Going to add even more build versatility. And it looks like for the DLC, since fire isn't going to be that great, maybe Holy will turn around and end up being a really powerful weapon or a elemental damage type for the DLC. Can't wait to find that out too. Next up here is Gideon. Gideon truly is never a challenge. He's always way too easy for me. I can't even remember the last time he took more than 1 try. It's been a long while. He doesn't have a lot of HP, even on max scaling, and he's just really easy to fight, especially from a distance. Yeah, this is one fight I truly never worry about. Like, I don't go into Gideon and be like, oh man, this is going to be rough. As far as Godfrey, Radahn, and Eldenbeast, I think that, yeah, this is going to be tough, but with Gideon, it's more like, yep, let's just go get this over with, and then, climb the tree up there and head towards Godfrey and move on with the end game. I mean, he's really no tougher than a couple of the mage NPCs in the game. Overall, he kind of fights the same way, and he doesn't have a ton of HP. There's even some of the NPC invaders on New Game Plus 7 that will have more HP than Gideon. Next up here is Godfrey. Now, Godfrey was tied with Maliketh for the most tries. I think it took 3 or 4. He actually might have ended up being the most because Radahn and Eldenbeast, believe it or not, ends up being 1 try, although Eldenbeast runs from me and it ends up being an incredibly long fight. Sorry about that in advance, by the way. Everything else went pretty smoothly. This Godfrey fight, though, ends up being pretty intense, and it definitely comes down to the wire. Yeah, now Godfrey has 0 fire resistance in Phase 2, so you can take advantage of that, but he does have moderate bleed resistance. Now, bleed does work well against him. If you're using jump attack bleed builds, that'll destroy anything, even with moderate or high bleed resistance that isn't immune, but as far as Bloodblade itself goes, it's just okay in this fight because he does have that moderate bleed resistance. I think the reason I love this build a ton isn't just because it's totally versatile, it's because of the fact that you can use so many different things just by throwing another seal in the offhand for the passive boost, and then using the Dragon Communion seal, and then switching back to the Scavenger Curve Sword Bloodblade, one of my favorite Ashes of War, and Burnout Flame, which is a ton of fun to use. If you're wondering how I came up with the idea, it was actually pretty simple. I switched to a dragon build for my video because I was going to do dragon incantations, but I'm not a huge fan of them, so I started messing around with different incantations, trying different seals in the offhand, and I found the damage was quite good. So I figured I'd mix my 2 favorite things. As somebody who played Dark Souls, I loved pyromancy builds, so I figured I'd add fire in, and then I'd add bleed, one of my favorite Ashes of War, in Bloodblade, and then use the Blasphemous Blade so that you have such a powerful and reliable weapon that can heal you too. Yeah, Eldenring has so much build diversity that you can pretty much build a ton of different things, and you can make your builds more versatile. I'm trying to use different stuff lately. I've actually tested some quality builds and a couple different things that I don't normally do, and you're going to see a lot of that coming up. We're going to be doing some off-meta stuff, some stuff to keep us occupied for the next 4 months while we wait for DLC. Yeah, his fight ended up being really intense. By the way, his grapples on New Game Plus 7 can do 60 vigor worth of damage, even with good armor, so if he grabs you, it's pretty much over. And as far as his regular physical attacks, they're incredibly hard-hitting. This fight is definitely one of the more challenging ones once you get to max scaling. Now, you may notice that the Blasphemous Blade is doing a little bit more damage in Phase 2. It probably came up on screen, but Phase 1 has, I believe, 20% fire resistance, but Phase 2, Horoah Lou, has 0, so he has no fire resistance whatsoever, much like Radahn and Malenia. A lot of people will tell you that 0 is neutral, and in many ways 0 is neutral, but for me, I always feel like 0 is weak too, given there's so many boss resistances in the game. When they're taking the full complement of an elemental damage type, that's something that we can always take advantage of. And Horoah Lou finally went down after an intense fight with Godfrey and Horoah Lou. Overall, I really like this build in this fight, specifically because it was able to take advantage of a whole bunch of different things, and we switched it up throughout the fight, which is something I don't do too often. That was a lot of fun. Now on to Radahn and Eldenbeast. So much like Horoah Lou, we're going to go into Radahn, and he's going to have 0 fire resistance too. So we're mainly going to focus here on the Blasphemous Blade. Now we could use Burnal Flame, but it's a lot of RNG since he's a small target. We're going to stick with the Blasphemous Blade here, which is incredibly reliable, and get through phase 1 as quickly as we can. Now, Eldenbeast, as I mentioned, we're going to go into that soon, and that's going to end up taking a while. I do get hit probably more times than I should have, but at the end of the day, having this fight go in one try was fantastic, because generally speaking, they take me a couple tries now for most builds, because it's very much a stamina check, and they have a combined 50,000 HP with a fairly decent amount of resistances on New Game Plus 7. Yeah, Radahn can be a little bit of a pain. He doesn't have a ton of HP. I think he has 20,000, Eldenbeast has 30,000, so I guess it's actually decent. But overall, he's generally a glass cannon most of the time, and with 0 fire resistance in the Blasphemous Blade, we're able to take him down, I think, in just over a minute. Good damage from it, around 2,000 plus each time, which is great, gets through the fight relatively quick, and keeps us healed. I do mess up something here. I'm not able to get the buff off in time, and it ends up impacting my damage in a very negative way here, because normally I would get substantially more as I switch to Pest Threads. So if you do a couple of buffs, Pest Threads can work fantastic for Eldenbeast, and we do have decently high scaling on the Dragon Communion Seal. I believe it's 330 something, so it should work well overall. We did get 6,000 damage right from the get-go, but I normally get 10,000 plus if I'm able to get the buffs off in time. But this is where the running starts. He starts running around. I don't have a lot of FP flasks. It turns into a stamina check like it is a lot of the time, and his resistances and everything make it difficult. He has really good elemental resistances, 40 on everything and 80% on holy, and his physical resistance is 10 on all physical damage types. Alright, as we run around a bit here, I think this ends up being around a 5-minute fight, which is pretty crazy. One of the longest Eldenbeast fights I've had in a long time. It just turned out that way. I was able to rebuff here, but he ends up he continues to run and run and run, and yeah, the final boss in this game is incredibly frustrating, but in a second here, we're going to get to the next DLC question. So for the next DLC question, as far as the actual trailer itself goes, some of the locations, it looks really big. Now, it was indicated that it's going to be bigger than Limgrave. I'm assuming they mean probably about the size of Limgrave and Weeping Peninsula. How do you feel about the size of the DLC, at least what's been leaked and mentioned so far? Yeah, very curious to know your thoughts on that. I know some people are thinking that's not enough. Other people think that's great, but I think it's going to be around $40 in US dollars, which is kind of expensive for a DLC, but if it does add a ton of excellent content, and Eldenring is for me a 10 out of 10 game, and adds on to it, and it lives up to anything like the Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 DLCs, it's going to be well worth it. Yeah, Old Hunters and the Ring City specifically for me was a phenomenal DLC. It's probably my favorite DLC so far. I'm sure Elden Ring is going to surpass that with Shadow of the Erdtree, but the Ring City was an incredible DLC for Dark Souls 3. And now we have to run from Elden Star. So he's running from me the entire fight, and then now I'm running. I love this fight. All joking aside, this is one of the worst fights for me in the entire game. I really don't enjoy the final fight. I enjoy pretty much all the other bosses in the game. I'd rather face Malenia over and over again than fight Eldenbeast. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way as me, but man, he runs a lot. It's absolutely crazy. His AI is incredibly frustrating. I know, I heard too that we were supposed to have Torrent in this fight, and that would have helped greatly because we would have been able to catch up to him and actually fight him instead of running around over and over again. But anyways, yeah, you can see my frustration with Eldenbeast. It's always there. I always find this fight just kind of something that I have to do to go on to the next journey, and I love the entire rest of the game, but the final boss for me, definitely a letdown. But don't worry, DLCs are known to scale, at least as far as Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne. They usually scale for the endgame, which means the true final boss of the game, or something, probably one of the most challenging bosses in the game, is probably going to be the last boss in the DLC if FromSoftware's history is the same. And it probably will be, because they have a good history with that. It's going to be really challenging. I'm already willing to guess that the recommended levels that we're going to see once DLC actually drops, the recommended levels is probably going to be between 100 and 120 for the final parts of the DLC. That's my expectations, because that's kind of similar to the 80 to 100 or so for the Ring City and then Bloodborne with Old Hunters too. Yeah, I know we went off topic there, but this fight ended up going on for, as I mentioned earlier, it was about a 5-minute fight, with Radahn in total ended up being about 6 minutes. Eldenbeast just had some really bad RNG here, and I wanted to beat him first try. I knew it was going to come down to the wire, and it did. Overall, we did end up getting him, though, with pest threads at the end of the day, but it did take longer than expected. I didn't change any of my talismans, if I remember correctly. You can use the Ritual Sword talisman, though. That will help you in this fight if you want to add some damage to pest threads. But overall, I kind of wanted to originally cut this out, but since it's basically a boss strategy guide too, I wanted to show off taking on Eldenbeast. For those that stuck with me, he's going to go down in short order here, and I chose Pest Threads because a lot of the other stuff we're using isn't really great against Eldenbeast. Works great for all the other bosses. Even the Blasphemous Blade is kind of just okay with him, though it does keep you alive by giving you additional HP. That part is helpful. And we're going to get in a couple hits at the end because we ran out of FP, we ran out of HP, we pretty much ran out of everything. But again, I wanted Eldenbeast out of the way because at the end of the day, I get to start a new journey and work on new builds. And since I only used one larval tier for this playthrough, I can go grab all 18, which will help me make even more builds. Yeah, so I capture everything on Xbox Series X with an external drive in 4K 60 FPS, and then I edit on my PC. All of my characters are on Xbox. I've only had a PC since probably around last summer, the end of last summer, so all of my good characters are on Series X. For this, we have the Blood Pyro Knight build. Let's go into equipment. For equipment, we have 2 Dragon Communion Seals. We have the Blasphemous Blade. We have the Scavenger Curve Sword on a Colt with Blood Blade. We have the Giant Seal in the offhand for the Burn of Flame boost, but you can boost any other incantations with different seals. You can check out the armor set here. A mix of Knight's Cavalry, Scaled Gauntlets. We have the Skeletal Helm, Shard of Alexander. Box Canvas Talisman, Godfrey Icon for Burn of Flame, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, with the Faith tier that we're using, that'll give us 10 additional levels. We'll have 45 Faith and 45 Arcane, giving us soft caps and good scaling for the Dragon Communion Seal. We have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 28 Endurance. We're using Golden Vow, Howlish Brewery, we have Burn of Flame, we have Swarm of Flies for some distance, even more distance bleed than Blood Blade, and then we have Dragon Ice 2. For the buffs, first things first, we're going to drink our tier. Then we're going to cast Golden Vow because it's our longest duration incantation. You can fill up your FP at this point. And then we're going to use Howlish Brewery. After that, we have a ton of different options in terms of what we want to use. If we use the Giant Seal in the offhand, we can then use Burn of Flame. Such a cool incantation. And then we have Swarm of Flies, we have the Blasphemous Blade, we have Blood Blade on the Occult Scavenger Curve Sword. There's a lot of versatility here. There's Swarm of Flies, and then you can switch to 2 Dragon Communion Seals if you can get a second one to run Dragon Ice and some Dragon Incantations too. Such a good and fun and versatile build. Definitely check this one out. The journey that we were going into for this one was 31. Next one up will be Journey 32. And thanks for watching this one. Don't forget to sub if you enjoyed this. I know this is different than what I normally do because it's an individual build, but it has a ton of versatility. It allows you to run a bleed build, incantations, and the Blasphemous Blade. Be on the lookout for the Black Flame version, which will make an appearance in my off-meta builds. That will be out probably a day or two after this one, a couple days after this one. Can't wait for that one. Looking forward to it. Thanks for watching, and be sure to sub.